What's up, Tsla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the overall markets. I'm going to break down why the share price of Tesla is looking very promising heading into tomorrow, what's happening with Apple's earnings that just came out, and a big catalyst for tomorrow. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 30 in total, and the offer ends very soon at the end of March. Anyways, let's talk about what's happening with the market and Tesla. The market saw a very, very interesting day. There was a lot of attempts by the bears to try to drag the market lower, but they ended up failing because at the end of the day, the market closed in the green. We got a nice green day for SPY, for the QQQ, for Tesla as well. Tesla saw a very interesting day where we essentially pumped in the morning after earnings came out. We were not able to break this resistance, so we got this rejection. But then Tesla held its support right here at our 200 EMA, and we got bought right back up. And Tesla looks like it wants to push even higher from here, looking at our PPO and the fact that there's good volume coming in, and some buyers try to defend it. So I'll talk more about Tesla stock in the next couple of minutes. Just know that as far as Tesla's earnings has gone, they did miss on some of their earnings, at least for Q4 2024. But despite that, they managed to offset that by talking about their potential robotaxi that's coming out very soon, the developments of FSD unsupervised coming out in Texas and eventually expanding in more areas of California, the growth for the Cybertruck production and their other expansions. And Musk talked about how Tesla has the potential to become the most valuable company on the planet, with so much growth to come for 2026, and then 2027 and 2028 being exceptional years. So overall, their margins were not bad. Good growth by Tesla. We're hoping that we start to see a lot more improvements as time goes on. And with the FSD being launched in June in Texas, it's going to be very, very awesome. This is the unsupervised FSD that they're going to be testing. And eventually, what they're going to be continuing to expand it across the US. That's very, very bullish news, if anything. So that's why the share price came up. They also talks about Optimus and a lot of these other bullish claims about it, about how it's going to bring in a lot of revenue and how they're making a lot of progress at developing the hands and factors like that. So it was bullish. That's why I'm hoping that Tesla tries to break this resistance. So I'll talk about whether or not we break this and what catalyst will affect Tesla for tomorrow. Just know this. Today, we just got Apple and Intel announcing earnings, and Apple's earnings was huge. So what happened with this? Looking at it so far, we had a lot of claims made by Tim Cook. Overall, Apple did not see the best of sales for their iPhones. Year over year, the sales went down a little bit. But despite that, they had good earnings that broke records, and they saw lots of growth. I also want to mention that they did say some promising things for the upcoming quarters, which makes investors more excited. And that's why, despite the fact that iPhone sales slipped and Chinese revenue went down, Apple still had good earnings, and the share price is still in the green, which could help the market for tomorrow. So let's go over this real quick. Apple had their best quarter ever, according to Tim Cook, with revenue at $124.3 billion, up 4% from a year ago. That is great news. Tim Cook went on about how their products are continuing to improve. There's going to be a lot of interest for the iPhone 16, and we'll be watching to see how things improve, at least going into the upcoming quarter. They also showed us these numbers. So the iPhone sales are down 0.8% to about $69.1 billion. Just a tiny bit down. It's not that terrible. It's not really bad, if anything. But their Mac sales, iPad sales are all in the green. Their wearable, home, and accessories products are also down just a little bit, but then services and net sales are still in the green. Now, the Chinese sales are down just a little bit. Tim Cook was talking about this. They're down about 11% year over year because of a lot of changes in their inventory that were going on earlier and near the end of the quarter, and also because of the fact that there's growing competition. So those factors slowed things down for them. Despite that, EPS was a nice beat, up 10% year over year. Revenue is up 4% year over year to $124.3 billion. Both of them are beating expectations, right? EPS is at $2.40 above expectations. Revenue at $124.3 billion, beating expectations. Only the Chinese revenue was a little bit short, it's down 11%. iPhone sales were a little bit down, but everything else was quite good. Pretty much almost everything was quite good besides their expenses going up just a bit. But good margins, if anything, and that's still very optimistic amongst these investors. Only their operating cash flow did go down a bit, but that's something you would be expecting during times like that. So because of the fact that they went on about how demand is continued to be very, very strong. They're very optimistic for 2025 and their products. And because they beat on earnings to a good extent and announced a buyback, they basically announced that they're going to be spending $23.6 billion to buy back shares. That's good news, and that offset the bad news, right? That's a very, very good piece of news. That's why the share price is doing relatively well. So once again, more buybacks, nice growth, and Apple is going to help the market tomorrow. Intel has issued a weak forecast, but it beat on its fourth quarter results, and this still helped to offset that, and the share price is in the green. EPS is at 13 cents adjusted above expectations. Revenues at $14.26 billion above expectations. Not bad whatsoever. Intel's revenue did decline for the third straight quarter, but overall we saw nice growth, and we're hoping that we see big improvements in terms of their chip demand. So with that coming out, we're going to be watching to see how things end up going with them developing AI, buying more chips up, and then improving their products. It is true that their overall guidance is not the strongest for the first quarter, but we're hoping that they continue to improve this. Intel's client computing group also sells PC chips. They produced about $8.02 billion in revenue for the fourth quarter, down just a little bit. So hopefully we see an improvement there. Good earnings still help to offset that. So that's why the share price is still in the green. All right, that's it for earnings. There's just three more things that I'll talk about Tesla's share price. Okay, tomorrow is going to be Friday, January 31st, the last day of January of 2025. 1 hour before the market opens, we have some inflationary data coming out. We have the core PCE data. We're expecting this to be around 0.2% month over month. We also have core PCE year over year to be expected at 2.8%. For all items, we're expecting basically 0.3% month over month. And then for all items PCE, we're expecting 2.6% for the month of December. That's for all items PCE. So in my opinion, I want to note that CPI numbers were better than what we were expecting. They weren't too bad. So hopefully PCE is tame and it's all aligned with expectations. That could be a bullish catalyst for the markets. We also have some employment costs data coming out when it comes to benefits and wages. We'll see what that leads to, but that is it for now. Besides that, guys, just know that as far as the market goes, we have about 550,000 of these calls expiring, and we have over 2 million puts expiring with the 3.62 put to call ratio. So please keep that in mind. I'm hoping that this, leads to a potential squeeze because there's over 3.6 puts for every call for SPY expiring for tomorrow specifically. That could lead to a squeeze. The market is neutral. We did dip quite a bit on Monday, and since then the market's been trying to recover. Momentum is at fear, but this is once again going to become more neutral the more this grows. The put to call option ratio is at extreme greed. We start to see a lot of these buyers step into which, ended up causing this little dump in the markets on Monday, but then since then the market's still recovering despite that, and the VIX is in a very neutral place. We'll see what that leads to. So what does all of this data mean for the markets? Now I just want to focus on the charts and nothing else. Tesla's looking promising. So here's what's happening to Tesla, okay? We have this yellow trend line of resistance, right? We touch this, rejected. We keep rejecting, but we keep touching it. So if you keep testing a trend line, the more you test it, the more likely it's going to become that we eventually try to break this. So I'm hoping we eventually get that break. Now, notice this about Tesla. Okay, we pumped and then we dumped today only to get bought back up again. And let me show you what happened on the 5 minutes time frame. So looking at this is what Tesla essentially did. We essentially gapped up, pushed, came back down, and we saw this thing test our 200 EMA at 384. Then we bounced right back up. And the 200 EMA is actually on the 4-hour time frame. My point is the buyers came. They showed up. They defended Tesla, and they closed this in the green after the very, very promising and exciting earnings report that Tesla announced. So that's a good sign. So whether or not we bounce depends on this. Let me talk about these levels. So look at this yellow trend line of resistance. It's right over here, this yellow line. That's going to be our very, very key resistance for tomorrow, okay? By tomorrow/next week, here's what I'm looking for. If Tesla does this, if we push again, I think we're going to be pushing against this resistance. If we could hold above this on a 4-hour basis, if we break past this and then we retest it and bounce, we're looking for 414 and then 420 is our targets into the 420s. That's the bullish case, okay? The bearish case is we push the yellow trend line of resistance and we reject off the trend line. We come back down to 390. Those are going to be your two main cases for Tesla. I'm hoping that the bullish case pans out, if we could get that break tomorrow, watch for confirmation, watch your levels just to be safe. But I'm saying that I hope that we get that break, and I do lean a little bit more in favor of that because we're getting good volume. There's buyers stepping in. We dumped today to about 384 only to get bought back up. So there's a lot of buyers. They're very present, and there's a lot of optimism after what Tesla just announced. With Apple doing well with earnings, and if we get a decent PCE report, as long as the news is good for Tesla and we don't get anything too bad, we hopefully could try to break this trend line and start pushing for 420. I hope that ends up being the case, so we'll see just to be safe. All right, so I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's 100% guaranteed we do anything because nothing in the market's guaranteed. But what I'm saying is that there's a good chance we try to break past this for the bullish case. And if that's the case, we're looking for 414 and 420 as our targets. If we get a rejection, we will turn back down, but I hope that doesn't happen. I lean a little bit more in favor of this because of how optimistic investors are looking because of good volume that's coming in for Tesla. So let's see how it goes. Overall, Tesla's doing well. How about SPY? Well, SPY is looking bullish. Why is this bullish? Look at these last 4-hour candlesticks. We're just continuing to get bought back up. We're holding our 20 and 50 EMAs nicely. The bears came today. They were trying to push the market down. They failed. They're struggling to bring this market down. So far, it favors the bulls. If I'm bearish on SPY, I want to see us lose 603 and 600. Today, we didn't even come close to 600. We actually held above it very nicely, and the buyers continued to hold it up very, very well. What's going to likely happen is we chop around a bit because Apple's in the green and because there's this big surge in buying that's going on. I'm seeing some tech stocks that should be pushing, such as like possibly Microsoft. I'm not too sure about that one, but I think Nvda has potential. Apple has potential. Also, Google has a lot of potential. And then Tesla obviously has potential. So a lot of these tech stocks could help SPY alongside the broader markets. So I think we're going to be going for this gap fill. I think that's the most likely case. Unless we lose 603 and 600 to turn back down, that's the bearish case. As long as we don't do that, we favor a push for 608s to fill this gap, then eventually try to visit close to all-time highs between 608 and 610. Then we'll see, does SPY reject off this area and make a big move down, or do we just break out for like 615? So we're going to be watching to see if we reject here or not. But for now, I do anticipate we're going to be trying to fill this gap, and maybe as soon as tomorrow, as long as we're above our key EMAs and we're looking more bullish on a technical basis, okay? If you look at the PPO, it looks bullish. The 4 hours looking good. The daily is looking good. SPY is looking very promising, at least thus far. We still have that gap to fill in the daily, so close to 608 is where I think we're going. Looking at the QQQ, the same setup. So what's good is Apple's doing well. Okay, we're seeing Microsoft add support. We're seeing Nvidia trying to balance. We're seeing many of these tech stocks doing well. Google's looking like it has potential. So that's a good sign. If we hypothetically lose 521, we're going to be turning back down and eventually dipping for like closer to 515. If we close below 521, that's like not the best of signs. As long as we're above 521 to 522, this is favoring and wants to slowly push up for about 528-ish to fill this gap. I think that's the most likely case. We push a little bit more to fill that gap. I favor that looking at the 4 hour and the fact that Apple's doing well. Now, once we hit 528, we could reject and come back down. That's like the bearish case. And if we break and hold above this support, we're going to be looking for an attempt to get back up to about 533 or above, right? So I think for now, don't worry about if we reject or not. Just focus on us trying to fill the gap to 528, and we'll see if we reject or not from there. But expect that the most likely possibility is upside. So keep that in mind. The Russell 2000 is looking promising because of the fact when you zoom out, this looks like an inverse head and shoulders that's slanted on the 4 hour basis, as long as we're above our 50 EMA. The 4 hour is showing a PPO crossover and we're getting a little bit more volume. So I would say this, I want to see this essentially come down to about 227 and try to bounce. This could be forming like a left shoulder ahead and then like our right shoulder to start pushing towards the 230 area. So I find that to be the most likely possibility. I think we could be pushing back up for 230. So watch and see if that ends up being the case. So just keep that in mind, guys. For ES, we look a bit more bullish. If we lose 60, 87, 60, 72, we're looking for a dump back down to the lower 60, 30s. And as long as we're above 60, 87, we favor a push for 61, 25 to fill this gap and higher levels. In my opinion, we're forming a nice accumulation, so we could be pushing for 61, 25. And I think the odds favor upside as the most likely possibility. So we'll see how things end up going from here. Overall, we're holding support quite nicely, so I think this is favoring the 61.25 area, so it's doing a great job. For NQ, there's a big gap to fill up here around the 21,876 area. We're holding this support very nicely, so I think that this is forming like a bullish wedge. If we hypothetically lose 21,500 tomorrow, this could be dipping back down to these lower levels. As long as we're above as long as we're above 21,580, I think there's a very, very good chance that this is going to consolidate and start pushing to fill this gap, taking us up to about just under 22,000, maybe closer to 21,860 as the most likely possibility. So this is favoring upside to fill that gap. We're forming a wedge right here, which looks pretty good. We'll see if we continue. Looking at Bitcoin, there might be a small dip before it tries to bounce again. Might retest this trend line right here before it tries to continue to slowly push up higher like this. We're riding this yellow trend line up, which is looking promising. If we end up losing 103,400, we dip back down to 102,000. As long as we're above the trend line, we should continue to push up for 106,000. So it's looking quite good. For Nvda, I like the setup a little bit because I mentioned to you all I was a little concerned about this dip, but then we got bought back up, which is a good sign. So what's happening is we're trying to form a base here. It's trying to base between 117 to 120. As long as we hold this might try to push higher. If we lose 117 tomorrow, we could be dipping to like 115 or below. As long as we're above 117 to 120, though, what's going to likely happen is this: we form an accumulation and then start breaking out tomorrow, if not by Monday, back up to like 132 to 133 as the most likely possibility. I tend to favor that a little bit more. We'll see, just to be safe, depending on these levels. So I think that we might be pushing for 132 to 133 soon, but that depends on if we could hold these levels. So far, we're doing a good job. So I favor upside a little bit more. So we'll see if that ends up continuing to be the case. Once again, for Tesla, we'll see if we break the trend line to start pushing for 420. I hope we break past 420. That's going to be a good sign for Tesla. We'll see about that. For Aapl is currently up almost 3%, so good job with earnings. It's good that they actually beat, despite the fact that so many people said they're going to miss. So good job by Aapl. There's a possible left shoulder ahead forming a double bottom, then our right shoulder forming here for us to start pushing higher. I see that as a strong possibility. For this to pan out, you want to be breaking past 246. If that breaks, we're looking for essentially 250. Now, if we end up losing 236 and then 233, we could turn back down. As of right now, we're favoring upside for a bigger push towards the 250 area. We'll see if we break past 246 tomorrow. Apple's looking promising with the inverse head and shoulders setup, so it could be trying to push closer to the higher 240s to 250. With that being said, guys, that's it for my main tickers. Now I'm just going to be going on a speed run for the rest of these. Netflix is riding this trend line up just a little bit, but it's very flat right now. It's not really doing a whole lot. Might be a small dip towards our 20 EMA before it tries to bounce like this and just consolidate. It needs to break 990 to start pushing for 1,000 plus. And if we lose 968, we dip back down towards 955. Right now, I just think we consolidate, so it's not really doing a whole lot. MSTR has the same thing. We're barely holding this trend line right now. There's a nice inverse head and shoulder setup. I think it might slowly inch its way up towards like 345. If we were to lose 335, we dip back down, but I think this just inches its way up higher very, very slowly. Celsius is looking bullish because we're trying to break past our 50 EMA right here, forming a nice cup. If we end up losing 26.1 and 25.5, we could be dipping back down to the 24s. As long as we're above 26.1, we're going to be favoring a pushback up to 27. With a double bottom here and more upside, I think this is favoring upside for a cup. So I'm going to be looking for an attempt to try to break resistance at 26.25 to push for the 27s. Notice that Supermicro has a very nice structure. There's this falling wedge that I drew out yesterday, and notice we're starting to break out of it. So if we were to lose, just hypothetically, 27.5, we dip back down. As long as we remain above this wedge and we continue, I am favoring 29.42 tomorrow, then 30.73 after that. So I think we favor upside a little bit more as the most likely possibility. I said that Palantir is looking bullish in my opinion yesterday. Nice inverse head and shoulders setup. I think this is favoring a push for 83. Overall, this is a nice inverse head and shoulders, and we could be pushing for 83 plus as the most likely possibility. If we lose 80 and 78.6, then we could be dipping to 76. But I think as of right now, we're favoring a push for 84. For Rivian has a falling wedge-like structure. If we manage to break past 13, we're looking for a much bigger push for about 13.5 to be revisited. If we end up failing at 12 flat, we're going to be dipping back down. There's a falling wedge, and there's a little bit of potential for us to try to test 12.68 and eventually the 13s for a bounce. I find that to be a lot more probable. SoFi has a bullish wedge-like structure, but it depends if it can hold support. If we lose 16 flats, where this gap is, I'm going to be looking for a move back down. As long as we're above 16.4, we're going to be favoring a push to 17.3 because that's where we have previous support becoming resistance. There's a wedge forming. We also have this imbalance to fill. So this makes me favor upside a little bit more for 17 to about 17.29. AMD looks a bit more bullish, but we have to try to break 119.5. If that breaks, we're looking for an attempt to get back up towards the 120 then 122 area. If we lose 118, we're looking for a dip back down towards 116. Overall, I think this is favoring the 120 area, then eventually this gap fill for 122. Overall, we're looking a bit more bullish. I want to see us break 119.5 and 128 for confirmation to really start pushing to fill this gap. This is trying to follow the trend that Nvidia is on, so it looks promising, but let's break resistance just for confirmation to see this push even more. Also, ARM is looking a bit more bullish. We are currently going to be testing this resistance right here at 155. If we break this, I'm looking for an attempt to get back up to about 158, then eventually the gap fill for 162. Overall, just a nice accumulation here. We could be pushing higher, so I'm liking this setup. If we could get back above 155, I think that's a good sign that this is going to be pushing higher, and this will eventually try to break out right here. We have this resistance right here at 155 to watch for, so watch that very closely. If we get back above that, I think we could easily push closer to 158 than 160. If we lose 151, we could be dipping back down to about 149. But overall, I think this is favoring upside a little bit more. For coin, we're forming a nice cup-like structure. I like the fact that it's holding support. If we end up losing 296, we could be dipping back down to where this gap is around 290. If we end up breaking this resistance around 304, we're looking for an attempt to get back up to about closer to 310. I think that with the accumulation right here, we're favoring an attempt to get up to 308 very soon. So I think it's looking quite promising. And this cup is looking pretty good for coin. Just like Bitcoin, I think it's going to follow the trend where this kind of like dips a bit and tries to bounce higher for the 310 area. Might be a bigger dip if we come down to fill this gap, or it could just be a small one before it tries to go. But overall, it's holding up quite well. Amazon's in a range right now. We have support in this 235 area and resistance at 240. We'll be looking to see if we get a bounce here as we're in a range. So just watch this very, very closely, especially as time goes on. For others out there, we have Meta. Meta is slowing down just a bit. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up dipping a little bit more towards this 675 to 670 zone. And we'll see if we bounce back up to 700 or not. So watch that closely. If we lose 669, we're looking for a dip back down towards like the 650s. As long as we're above that, we could try to bounce. I see a small dip coming for essentially 680 flat, maybe a little bit below that before it tries to bounce, so just keep that in mind. For Microsoft, I like the setup right now because what's very good about this is the fact that when you zoom out of Microsoft, okay, if you look at the last year, this thing has been in a range. It loves to bounce near the low 400s. It loves to reject off 450. It's been going back and forth pretty much for the past year. So historically, it likes to hold near the low 400s. We'll see if we try to base right here, whether it's 400 flat or right here. I'm hoping that it tries to base right over here around this 412, 413 area. If we could base here, there's a good chance we try to bounce back up towards 420, then eventually 425. So let's hope we get a bounce and a base on Microsoft. Google looks very promising to me. Why is that? Look at the last couple of months on Google. We're going back and forth between the low 200s, 200 to 201 as resistance, and 190 is our support, going back and forth and back and forth. This time around, we're breaking past this 201 area, so we could be pushing for essentially 205, then eventually, to much higher levels like 208 and 210. So I think we favor upside on Google. We'll see if that ends up being the case or not, so watch that very closely. For GameStop could be favoring a push back up towards the 28.3 area. Might dip to 27.6 before it tries to bounce, but I think that there is some upside potential here. For Amazon could be dipping back down to 3 flat, so watch to see if that ends up being the case. Sorry, did I say Amazon? I meant AMC. Sorry about that, guys. AMC is looking a little bit weaker. I think 3 flats is coming. DJT might be dipping a little bit more towards 30 before it tries to bounce. Might be a little bit more downside. Look for 30 to see where it ends up basing. The VIX is on a bit of a downtrend. We have this big gap to fill down here around the 14.8 area, so it could continue to downtrend. We'll see if buyers return or not, so just keep that in mind. For the 10-year treasury yield, we have a head and shoulders pattern that's developing. This is once again a little bit more bullish for the markets after what the Fed has announced. And although the dollar is looking a little bullish, I'm not really worried about this because the dollar push today and the markets still remain bullish. So it's not really affecting the market as it normally does. With that being said, the market is favoring the bulls. The bulls have a bigger edge. Tesla's going to try to hit this resistance. We'll see if we break this to try to get back up to 420 or not. So hopefully we get a nice bounce tomorrow. I really hope we do. We'll see if we break resistance for confirmation, so watch for that. With that being said, I think we're doing a fantastic job. I thank you for listening, guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow before the market opens to report how PCE is looking. Until then, have a good day and peace out.